Hey everyone, thank you for coming. So I work at Treblle, and I'm here to give you a product demo. I just quickly threw these slides together because I don't want to be outshone by the guys at Postman. So I'm Steve McDougall, and you're at Nordic APIs. So this is me. I like to play around with AI and create avatars for myself. You can find me on Twitter and GitHub under just Steve King, and I do developer relations here at Treblle. So let's do a demo. A lot of people ask me what Treblle is, it can be hard to explain what Treblle really is. It does analytics, it does observability and monitoring of your API. It's a really lightweight. Zoom in. There we go. And that might be easier to see. Yep. There we go. I've done this before. So the idea of Treblle is that you create projects, and each project represents one of your APIs. I'm going to give you a demo today of our demo API. So you can go into the project, and you can see the amount of requests, the average requests per minute, average payload size, as well as what we call the API score. And what that does is it gives you an overview of the performance, security, and quality of your API based on industry standards. That is a moving standard, so we're always fine-tuning that, always reworking that bit of the algorithm based on what we know about your API. And you can invite your team members to a project. At the minute, it's a project-based approach where you own the project and you can invite collaborators. However, we're currently working on changing that to allow easier onboarding. We are a startup, so we're slowly moving through some of these things. Our dashboard has got lots of customizable widgets based on what might be important to you. Things such as request per day, average response size and load time. Maybe app version is really important to you within your role. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into something a little bit more interesting, which is requests. So we've got a nice list of requests. Every request that comes into this API, it can either be real-time or you can turn real-time off like it currently is. If you turn it on, it just means that every request that starts to come through will start to show up on here. And as soon as, the internet connection is working fine. And this is where I apologize to Postman because I'm using something other than Postman to send this request. But there we go. I just sent a request to that API. That will pop up in a second. Here we go. That's just gone through our ETL scripts to show up on the dashboard there. And what that does is it shows you, I'm going to walk around if you don't mind. Over on this side, you've got a security score for each request. So for each request that comes in to your Treblle project, we analyze it based on lots of different factors from a security perspective. So you can get a really high-level overview of what security vulnerabilities you might have within your application. You've got a high-level overview of the load time, the response size, and what sort of devices. So if something pops out from a device you may not recognize, or from a location you know that you're not currently operating in, you can really start to look into, okay, so why is that happening in my API? So if we now just jump into this here. Oh, that was a 500 error.
Scroll down.
Who's making requests to my API? Oh, no. I should not have exposed that URL. So you're able to share this request. So let's say, for example, you're working with a third-party contractor. You might not want to completely onboard them into your API, or you might be working on something really specific. You can generate a request here. You can say it expires in an hour, a day, a week, a month, whatever that might be. And you can take this, and if I go to a new window here, I can very quickly go and have a look at that. I've got access to nothing else other than the request that was just sent. So it's a good way to allow kind of temporary access to different parts of maybe your observability or monitoring in case you're working with those third parties and you don't want to provide full access. So what we also have here, we've got a full breakdown of all the request parameters, any authentication mechanism that might be going on, any documentation that was created, and any headers that we detected on that request as well. It breaks down the data that was in the response, as well as creating a JSON output of what that response looked like, so you can start to look at validating that, and any response headers that was sent from the API. And what you have up here is the security is broken down on a request per request basis. So this one is currently a medium security risk. And to find out more information about that, you scroll down to the security audit here. And the things that we check for are SQL injection, the IP reputation, authorization, secure connection, if you're using IDs or UUIDs, is it a sequential identifier that's in that domain? That could be a potential vulnerability, because people can then start to traverse through those. We've got rate limiting, content labeling. You can read, right? Mm-hmm. I thought so. And it's a simple pass or fail. Did we detect the possibility of SQL injection on this from the request and the response and the information that we gather within our lightweight SDK? You can see where that request came from. You can see it came from Stockholm. A summary, the devices, the server information. This one, for example, was on a Linux server running on Laravel Vapor, which is a AWS Lambda runtime using PHP. No other information that's really relevant at that point. It was fast. You can see the response size was a little bit big. Maybe we should look into that one. So what you can do as a developer is, when you're building your API, what I like to do is create a Treblle project for that API. And while I'm building it, I check Treblle. I see, okay, missing these headers. My payload size is a bit big. How do I need to tweak and fine-tune this before I even get it to production? What it also does, it lists all the different endpoints. It will tell you how many problems there are, the average request per minute, how many requests, and the load time. You can see a nice, pretty graph. If you can't be bothered to read, maybe you haven't had your morning coffee, you can just go, yeah, it looks okay. You can obviously filter this down based on HTTP methods, the endpoint group, whether you've muted any specific endpoints that maybe you don't care about from the health check endpoint. You don't really want to look at monitoring on that one, do you? So then we also capture things like problems that are happening within your application. So if an error or an exception is thrown within your application, it's a basic stack trace, debug backtrace on where in your app that actually happened. So you can see, oh, I'm having issues with my API. We caught an error. That one is something that's built in PHP. They couldn't find a specific class, for example. Our API score, it breaks down performance, security, and quality. So as you can see here, my performance isn't great. You know, I'm using content encoding, which is fantastic, but I'm not supporting HTTP 2 or 3. I could probably improve my performance if I moved to something like HTTP 2, allowing a much faster bidirectional protocol. My response size may be a little bit big, and load time, it isn't great, but from a contextual perspective, I know that this is a PHP application. It's running on a serverless environment, and is going to talk to an external database, 52 milliseconds for that specific context. That's not too bad. Then from security, we're looking at HTTPS support and authentication, and the level of authentication that might have as well. And that is across your whole project, not just on that request level. Then we auto-generate API documentation based on what we know about your API. Because our integration is a lightweight application library, you add it to your application, you tell us what you want us to monitor, what you want us to observe, and we just start doing that for you. You filter out any potential PII data or any potential kind of domain-specific payloads that you might have in your application that you don't want to leave your ecosystem, we will automatically mask that before it is sent to us so it doesn't leave your ecosystem or your control. And then we generate this documentation based on all of those requests that are coming in, which is just an open API specification. You can come down, you can see that we've got post articles, title, content, image, user. You can start to see that all the different models that you've got, how someone might interact with your API, and if you're working with a third-party mobile team, or maybe you're working with in an asynchronous fashion because you're a distributed team, something like this is really useful because then you don't have to wait for the back-end team to come on board to start saying, okay, how do I do this with this API? How do I do that with that API? And on top of that, because we all like to follow trends, we built an API assistant using an AI model. I think we're all doing it these days, so it should not really come as a surprise. We called ours Alfred because we like Batman, and we see our API model here a little bit like Alfred the Butler, whereas we can be Batman because we've got an API and we like to feel cool. So what I can do with this, it's GPT style. You just ask it, how can I create a new article using Go? So I want to send an API request to my API using Go, and it'll just tell me, okay, so this is how you do it. Eventually, when it finishes running out of all the tokens, it will format it correctly. And it will tell me, okay, so this is how you do it. Here's how you can create your struct. Here's how you then instantiate that struct. And then we're going to start to marshal that data, send a post request, and you're all good. So that is Alfred. That is our documentation. And that is Treblle. Thank you.